Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Katy G podcast. I'm Katy Gostaspi, and the mission of my podcast is for us to realize that as lawyers and as human beings, we're great. We can do great things, and more importantly, we can be even more great and bring this greatness to the world through our brand, through our legal practice, and through thinking innovatively, having some agility and flexibility to us, being efficient and doing it with others. And I do this podcast for two reasons, as I always say. I care deeply about humanity and the practice of law. I think it's a very noble profession, and sometimes we lose sight of how good we can be at it and how happier we can be doing it. And I also do this because I struggle just like everyone else with my feelings of being less than and woe is me. And some days are ugly, some days are great. And we bring on guests that are here to show you their humanity and how they practice law successfully. And so today I've got a real treat for you. Today we're recording this on World Kindness Day of all days, November 13th. That will not be the day you're listening to this, but it brings an extra bit of fun and grace to the recording, I like to think. So my guest today is Juan Zuniga. Juan is managing partner of Rimon law firm. We're both in San Diego, actually, but Rimon is way bigger than San Diego offices. And I've also got my friend from the past, Rhonda Grayson, who is Talent Acquisition Director at Rimon, also joining us today. And I am thrilled to have you both on the podcast. So thank you for taking time out of your super, super busy schedules to grace us really with your presence, with your intellect, with your wisdom, and sharing it with other lawyers. Welcome.
Thank you, Kathy. It's great to be here.
You're so welcome. And so Juan is a real estate lawyer and his focus is Latin America. And I just have to tell you, I didn't know much about your law firm until I kept hearing it over and over again from different people, including my friend Ali Mojdei, who Juan, and then of course Rhonda. And I was like, what is this fantastic dynamic law firm and why have I not heard of them? And shame on me because they've been around for a while. It's not like you guys are new. But before we get to the law firm and what we can all learn and take away from the structure and diversity and how we can grow, um, Juan, can you step back and give us a little bit about your story and your background and tell us where you come from and how you got to where you are?
Sure, Kathy. So I hope I don't ramble too long in response to your question. I'll try and keep it succinct if I
I'll help
can.
you out. No worries.
Yeah. Feel free to guide me, direct me. So um, I guess I should start by saying, essentially I was born into a bilingual and bicultural family. I was born and raised in Southern California, Los Angeles particularly. And my family background is sort of mixed Mexican American, and on the other side, um, Scottish American. Through all of my family can trace back immigrant roots depending on sort of what generation you come to. But essentially, it starts in the East with the Scottish American side of my family, and it starts with the South from the Mexican side of my family. And so I sat firmly growing up in two cities and two cultures and two languages. My second city growing up was Mexico City, so I would spend time there as a kid with great frequency. Although I did all of my education in the U.S. in California public schools in the 70s and the 80s. And then I was really fortunate enough to get the opportunity to go to Harvard College as a freshman in 1982, and that was something of a game changer for me on many, many different levels. One of those levels, going back to the theme here, is that picking up and moving out of Los Angeles and moving over to the East Coast for me when I was 17 was actually a greater shock and transition to me than going to Mexico City. I mean, to me, Boston, Cambridge felt more like a foreign country than crossing the border into Mexico. Um, um, And quite frankly, for what it's worth, the concept of Hispanic, Latino in that period of time on the East Coast was very different than when it was on the West Coast. And Mexicans and Mexican Americans were not as a prevalent presence in the Latino community in the East Coast as we were or are in the South and Southwest. So it's almost like I was a minority in a minority, even if you will, going to the
I
East
get
Coast.
that.
Yeah, but nonetheless, that sort of becomes a theme for me. I eventually go back to law school at Harvard a couple of years after graduating undergraduate. And so what happens is, as you know, a law student in that type of institution, they gear you from a career services perspective primarily into big law. And that was,
Yeah.
primarily the course that I thought I needed to follow because that's what everyone else did. So that's what I did, right? I took the best paying job that I could find going back to my home in Los Angeles in 1992. But I was struggling with my identity a bit because I wanted to find some way so that my profession could actually reflect this dual cultural existence that I have.
Well, and if
Um,
I may interrupt you,
yeah.
Juan, how did you decide you wanted to be a lawyer? What made you decide to be a lawyer?
Well, so I was drifting and floating like many people do in their early 20s after college. And one of the things that I did as sort of an interim job was I worked with my dad. My dad was a small business bookkeeper, accountant, CPA in the Echo Park region of LA. And so one year during tax season, I went to work for him, and we were doing tax returns and small business returns. I think this was 1990, 1987, 1988, at roughly the same time that what was then called the Immigration Reform and Control Act was granting what was later called amnesty or commonly called amnesty, but it
Yeah.
really was a path to legalization to people who had been undocumented in the US for years. And my dad was kind of a go-getter kind of guy. He like looked at the paperwork and says, "Yeah, I could figure this out, right?" And so a lot of his clients were Latino individuals who were working, paying taxes, but were sort of on the margins of immigration legalization. And they came to him and said, "Hey, aside from doing my taxes this year, can you fill out the paperwork for me to get, my residency status?" And it was pretty amazing that someone who was relatively marginally educated could turn out and become an asset to the community and actually make an impact in people's lives. And so, not only were we doing tax returns that particular spring, we were doing the paperwork to get people legalized, and that sort of created like a flashbang moment in my consciousness. Was, wow, you can make a difference to people's lives by figuring things out, right?
Yeah.
Whatever it was. And to me, that was figuring things out was the path to being a lawyer because I didn't want to be a bookkeeper and a CPA like my dad. I wanted to do something more. I wanted to have a greater impact.
Well, it
And
sounds like your
so,
dad was an entrepreneur too. You see the need when people have it, they ask, and you give them what they need, right? And
yeah, and he was a serial entrepreneur, having started and failed a whole bunch of businesses like I have as well. But it was like you say, Kathy, filling a need for others who had trouble doing it for themselves because it wasn't within their skill set, or they didn't have the time, or they felt intimidated by the bureaucratic process, the legal process. We just kind of like cut through, figured out how to do it, and we probably changed. I mean, it wasn't a lot of people. We maybe changed the lives of 30, 40, 50, 60 families. I don't know how many applications we filed in that period of time, but it was material to those people in their lives. I mean, it was a changing point. And that
well,
was sort of
I
the
like
impetus for me to go to law school.
I like to say there's a famous quote by Margaret Mead: never underestimate the power of a small group of people to change the world. Indeed, that's the only thing that's changed the world. I might have misquoted her, but in general, 50, 60 people is a lot of people in my opinion. So that's a huge motivator for somebody to go to law school, when you can see not only can you practice in an area that's fulfilling. Hey, I'm an immigrant. We came here in 79 because of the revolution in Iran. We weren't Muslim. We just had to get out of the country for a couple of weeks. But I remember my parents were like, do you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer? So I couldn't stand the sight of blood, and I wasn't an engineering type because I'm too extroverted and too much about business development. So I said, I'll be a lawyer. But it's nice to know when you can make that difference and practice in a way that, as an immigrant, we prove ourselves, right? We were always being told about the immigrant status that we keep, and it's a way of earning our keep in the world, but it's also about making a difference. So I appreciate that being how you decided to be a lawyer. And then, of course, your path. Some people say going to Harvard, well, that was everything for you. But I tend to think that people misunderstand that where you went to law school is one thing, but what you do with it afterwards is really quite the feat. So tell me, for everyone who's listening, so Juan's path was through big law. And you can go on his LinkedIn profile, which we'll share, and you can see all that. But let's fast forward to today. Tell us about the firm. Tell us how you got to where you are with the firm and the difference you guys are making at the firm.
Actually, I need to interject an intermediate step before we go to that question, which was my
Absolutely.
transition out of big law. Um, I eventually was able to guide my career into a space where I was actually practicing in that area that was harmonious with my identity, in which I was representing people who were doing investment overseas into Latin America. And my bilingual and bicultural fluency was a value add to my clients, because when you are a cross border practitioner, um, you need to be able to guide your clients in something that they may not have intuitively um, internalized, which is, you cross borders, the system isn't going to change for you. You need to be adaptive to the system that you're going into and
Mm.
learn the rules. And a lot of people approach investment sometimes with arrogance and say, well, I'm the boss. This is the way it's going to be. Well, I don't care if you're the boss when you're in a country that has a completely different set of rules related to the manner in which companies are set up, business is done, all kinds of different factors and nuances. And so that's sort of the space that I created for myself in big law. But I was not particularly happy with with the way that paradigm of practice affects you in your career path. There's a very limited manner to continue to proceed towards growth within an organization like that. And Ron and I met when we were both working at Heller Ehrman together, and we had a lot of frustrations with respect to the manner in which big law, recruits and retains and promotes lawyers, especially lawyers of diverse backgrounds. And for me, I woke up one day and realized I'm not happy. And so, what do you do when you're not happy? You either stay unhappy or you decide to make a change. And for me, the change was breaking out of big law. And I decided after 15 years into my career to launch a solo practice. And instead of wanting to be, like law offices of Juan Zuniga or Zuniga and Associates or whatever, I wanted a concept that was kind of something that I could brand and create an identity around that was, again, harmonious with how I practice and what my personal identity was. So what I created was the Cross Border Law Group. And that was the name of my law firm. And for what it's worth, I launched that in 2007. And of course, in 2008, the recession comes and everything hits the
Oh, yeah.
fan. But I was able to actually survive the recession through the good grace of a lot of clients that I had been working with over the course of that years, who kept the work flowing. But what happened around 2013, maybe 5 years into my solo practice, was kind of like looking around and saying, well, now how am I going to grow and get to the next level? I kind of launched my solo platform um, a bit recklessly, perhaps, but I did have a plan and I executed the plan. But now, what's the next phase? What's the next step? And it was at that point that I was lured into Ramon, where I've been practicing the last 10 years. And the notion that I would ever go back to a law firm was non existent in my head. I was always going to be off on my own until I learned more about the Ramon platform, which allowed me to continue to keep the autonomy of my practice, which means for me primarily the relationship of value that I give to my clients. And that's value both economically and substantively, right? I mean, there's two components to that.
Absolutely.
Um, and so the economic component is that at a firm like ours, management doesn't tell you how much you have to bill your clients, how much you have to charge, how much overhead you're responsible for. Management dictates a lot of things in big law that I resisted and that I thought I had a better solution for being on my own. But yet being on my own, it was still small and it was hard to grow. Being
Yes.
able to move that autonomous platform into a law firm that didn't tell me how to practice, but knew and trusted that I was good at what I did and that I had good clients and quality clients and could be profitable. That was a game changer for me.
So,
Um,
so can I want to highlight a couple things you said just in case some listener missed it because it's critically important. Juan says it with such ease, but I really want you as the listener to really take in. He said it several times now, and this is something I work with clients on all the time. This harmonious meshing of your identity as a human being and your role as a lawyer in your practice area because I'm often brought in to really tease that out for lawyers because we forget that our identity is separate and apart from our role as a lawyer or our role as a father, husband, wife, whatever, daughter. And when they get enmeshed in a negative way, it's like how I was when I was practicing in big law. People would say, "Who are you?" And I would say, "I'm a fund lawyer." Fund formation lawyer, investment management lawyer, securities lawyer, whatever the name of the day was. That was not who I was. I was a human being and I had a whole separate identity. And I hope you guys are hearing Juan is very clear about his identity. And so that allowed him to have the courage, which is part two, is what I'm hearing, Juan, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you said, I am not happy here. And a lot of my clients say, well, I went to that fancy whatever school and I have this great education. And so I have to make this work. Have to make what work, folks? If you are not happy, if you are not, as he said, bringing value to your clients and making a difference in people's lives in a way that suits your identity, that allows you to flourish and shine and thrive as a human being, then there is no value to be brought because the stress of it is going to get to you and it's not going to be effective overall either. So I just wanted to highlight those things you say because you say it so effortlessly and obviously, but I don't want people to blink and miss that because it's critically important. And now you were getting to where it's important to know where you want to land and being solo. And I love the fact that you called the firm what you called it because you didn't put your own name on it. That's the other thing I hope everyone gets from this, that it doesn't have to be an ego driven proposition. And if you can't think of a snazzy name, hire someone to do it or just reflect on who you are as a person and what you want the world to remember from your message. As a branding expert, we do this all day long with people that people won't remember your last name necessarily, no offense, but they will remember somehow tying it to your story and what you do every day. Okay, so I just wanted to highlight that just in case it got missed somewhere. So now you chose Ramon because they allow this autonomy of practice with respect of you're good at what you do, we're going to let you do what you do, and the finances are obviously important, we've got to run a business, but it's not that we're going to control that so much, correct?
Yeah, that's right. And even now today as the managing partner, my job is to help and to guide my partners in their practice, not tell them how to do it. And I think that's really missing a lot from big law. There's this sense of a lack of trust in your lawyers to know what it is they need to do. A lot of things that Ron and I see when we get through recruiting is lawyers at big law coming to us and saying, one of the things I'm interested about in the Rimon platform is that I will be able to set my own rates. My rates are being escalated by some management committee in Washington or Chicago or New York who knows nothing about my practice, nothing about my clients, nothing about my region, but just is dictating from above what I need to do. And what we like to do is free the lawyers from those shackles and let them establish the value proposition. So that's one key value of our firm is autonomy of practice that we give to the lawyers. But another one that's really worth saying is, and what attracted me to it, is collaboration. And in our model, our economics are transparent so that if one of my partners comes to me and asks me to work on a cross-border real estate matter for their client, we both know at the moment of that engagement how much each of us is going to make from the work that I would be performing for my partner's client. And vice versa, if I'm exporting work, if you want to call it that, to one of my partners in a practice area that I can't service, whether it be employment or trademark or litigation or whatever. And the notion of that transparency, again, releases lawyers from the oppression of the big law economic formula, which is the distribution of profits and bonuses at the end of the year. We've released our lawyers from that sort of tyranny, if you want to call it that, because we're transparent with the manner in which we compensate each other. And so the economic transparency there also eliminates a level of envy amongst lawyers that truly allows them to collaborate. So really collaboration, autonomy, excellence, those are some of the core drivers of our value proposition as a firm. And what that also drives then, Kati, is a little bit more happiness and joy in the manner in which you practice law with your clients and the manner in which you collaborate with your colleagues. And that little bit of joy is going to bring you more happiness as a lawyer. It's going to make happier clients, and it's a happier law firm. It's a happier community.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I just have to stop you because I'm reeling. Everything you say is a beautiful soundbite that could be expanded on for hours and hours of conversation, frankly. I remember in 2013 when I wrote the book Personal Branding in 1 Hour for Lawyers for the American Bar Association. I led with the premise of happiness and joy in the practice. And I had I had a lot of great book reviews. It was a bestseller. But one of them said, "What does happiness and joy have to do with the practice of law?" And I thought, oh, it's 2013. We have a long way to go, right? So here we are 10 years later. And what you're saying couldn't be anything closer to the ultimate reality of life. And we get so lost in the weeds. I'm always taught working with my clients who are partners saying, now, how far in the weeds are you that you're missing the big picture? Are you happy? Are you enjoying your practice? And I think that's something you should be applauded on, all of you, if you can even bring a little bit of that you said. But I think there's this component that's really critically important. And I want everyone to listen to what you're saying truly. It's what I've termed emotional resonance factor. If you're not emotionally resonating with yourself because you're stable and you're grounded and there is no envy, then you can't emotionally resonate outward with your audience and deliver the best service. And people will fight me on that forever, and perhaps you, Juan, because they say to us, "But I'm a great lawyer." And I say, that's fantastic, but there's more to it. Not to the detriment of our brilliance as lawyers, but because there is a humanity involved and a diversity, which we want to bring Rhonda in and talk about in a little bit. But
Hey, let me push back on that a little bit to sort of help resonate it even more, because someone could say, "But I'm a great lawyer." Why don't we ask a different question? Is, well, do you want to be a great lawyer? If you go back to my sort of origin story that you were asking me about, I got a great sense of satisfaction of helping those people get that legal status. And these were people that my dad might have known for 20 years. And he turned around and he's like, hey, I didn't know David was illegal, right? Well, let's fix it, right? Let's help him. And there was a great sense of satisfaction that I got that helped me propel myself to law school. Today, as a lawyer, I still get satisfaction helping my clients figure out whatever puzzle I'm working on. But if that's not resonating with you, then maybe you're in the wrong profession. There's so many people who go to law school because it's sort of like the default option. And they
Yeah.
do it because maybe daddy is a lawyer and has their own law firm and blah, blah, blah. Well, are those reasons to do anything? If it's not resonating with who you are and what you like to do, maybe you want to be a mechanic. You don't want to be a lawyer. You're a great lawyer, but maybe it's not inspiring you. I mean, we got to find the harmony here.
Absolutely. And you know what? That's what I did. That's my background. I became a lawyer because I thought, as a good immigrant, this was how I was going to save the world. I had a great practice, grateful for every minute of my thriving practice, mostly in Washington, D.C., and then in house in Southern California. And then I woke up and I heard people kept saying, hey, can you tell me how you got that partner in charge to give you that client? How do you wine and dine? And I was like, oh my gosh, business development is something people really don't know. And so the stress of the job combined with that knowledge that I have this natural talent and I could help this community helped me get there. I share that story added on to Juan's comment because we're not trying to get you all to quit the practice of law. In fact, we need good lawyers out there, but we need good lawyers that are thriving and are willing to be well-rounded and look at their life from this perspective and say it's not all about being a lawyer. It's about being an effective, efficient, happy lawyer, because that's what the community needs. And to Juan's other point, this notion of collaboration, eliminating envy. I love how you use the word envy instead of competition. I caught that. And because I think competition is normal, but that's really where the toxicity builds up in law firms. I found from being hired to come in and clean that stuff up, where not only is diversity not flourishing, well-being isn't flourishing, and that's really the point. And so engagement is low, retention is low. If they are there, they're phoning it in, and it's because people don't trust one another. People don't think the other lawyers have their back. And it's not that we're part of a family within a firm structure. It's that we're fighting it out and we're against each other. And so there's no oneness. There's no sense of harmony, as you said so beautifully, within a community. And so I want you all to listen to the structure they've built at Rimon and see that there is a way of having that collaboration and transparency open up the doors of trust. And if you don't trust, then you can't really build anything, because one person can't build alone. Did I say that sufficiently for your purposes, Juan?
Absolutely. Is it for my purposes or your purposes? You said it very well.
Well, I just want to make sure that that really fits into your model because that's what I
Yeah,
heard, and I just want the
yeah.
summary to be accurate from your perspective. Now let's bring in, those are the lessons I think that Juan would like for you all to learn. Is there any other lesson that you want him to learn before we turn to diversity and bring in Rhonda?
Well, I mean, do bring in Rhonda. The issue of diversity, I think, is really important because if you look at, for example, some of the surveys of women in law that came out of Leopard Solutions, it was not dissatisfaction related to what we had to do during the pandemic. It was dissatisfaction of not being felt like you're an equal peer in your organization. And for what it's worth, a lot of this stuff related to economic envy and lack of trust, I think has trickle down effects to a greater degree to women and to people of color and to people who are essentially underrepresented. So the law firm environment creates, I think, additional levels of toxicity to those of us who come from those backgrounds. And
Yes.
Rhonda, as a recruiting professional, can probably speak much more on the front lines than I can about what she's hearing in the community out there.
So, Rhonda, tell us how you guys are addressing this within the firm.
Well, one of the things that I've noticed in just talking to those that are interested in learning more about Ramon and possibly thinking about joining us is that they are having these issues of belonging in their firms. Uh, part of what Juan mentioned about the economic envy, um, there are some things that we can't solve on an individual basis because some of them are systemic. And so you have to address the systemic things first before you get to the individual things. Just simple things. When people were in the office full time, you could have a bunch of attorneys going to lunch. So maybe the attorney that's the minority, that's the female, doesn't get invited to that luncheon. Well, at that luncheon, there's conversation about the business that's going on, the matters that are coming down the pipeline, who might want to get involved. If you don't have a seat at the table, you don't even get to hear about those conversations. And so that actually puts you on a trajectory to become isolated. And as we know, when you're isolated and you're not getting work, you're not meeting your hours, and then you get the notification, right? It becomes a vicious cycle. So, what we're doing here at our firm is we are much more open. We are much more transparent about the things that make a lawyer be able to succeed on our platform. Our compensation is transparent. All of the things that we've placed, because we are hybrid, we are intentional about the things that we've put in place to keep our lawyers as a tight knit community. It's not easy, but
No,
it's worth it.
absolutely.
Definitely worth it.
That's so well said, Rhonda. And Rhonda and I, for those of you who don't know, we go way back. And really, our focus was always women of color in the law, right? When we were on the board together. Uh, when I go into consult on diversity for law firms, I always bring in the well-being angle because well-being and diversity are not separate and apart. They're one, and they have to go hand in hand. And I think sometimes that's lost in the communication from a law firm's perspective. So how do you not solve for it? Let's not make it a problem. Let's just make it the essence of who people are, that we're human beings with a practice and we need to be healthy to thrive. And that healthiness allows us to see diverse perspectives because our vision gets bigger and we see that there's a lot more in the world. How give us some examples of how you guys provide for that well-being to thrive.
Yeah. Well, we have on our model, you get the freedom and the flexibility that you're looking for. Because we do not have a billable hours requirement, there's also no up and out. Having that billables hour requirement go away immediately removes some of the stress and the pressure. You're not waiting until the end of the year and trying to crank as hard as you can so that you can make that billable hour expectation. You're also not waiting for that PPP at the end of the year to come out of that black box because you know what you're getting paid every month along the way.
Yeah, that's really well said. I
And
hope
and
everyone who's
let me,
listening gets something away.
Kathy, let me interject something there because I remember when I was at Big Law, and something that Rhonda was making, allusion to in the sort of like who goes out to whom with lunch metaphor is, the way in which work is assigned, um, getting on to important matters is critical to your career advancement at Big Law. We are primarily a firm that is oriented towards partners and not a lot of associates. So we're talking about people who are senior lawyers who already have an established book of business. And so when you come into the door at Rimon and you eliminate a lot of these economic factors that drive bad behavior at law firms, what we try and drive and incentivize is good behavior, collaborative behavior, which requires the sort of social ability to build networks and trust relationships with your partners. So if, Rhonda is an employment lawyer, I can give her a piece of work that I don't do because I'm not an employment lawyer. We start to build a relationship. She becomes my person of trust and she starts doing all of my employment law work, right? And so then that sort of becomes an exercise in which um, issues of bad behavior that disadvantages underrepresented people kind of goes away in our universe, because it becomes very much sort of like a neutral proposition. Who's available and who's the best one to do something that I need at this particular moment in time? And so I'd submit that our environment would actually be a place where women, and I think particularly women, but also attorneys in most underrepresented spaces, would be very welcome and be given much more opportunity to thrive, because they'd be able to do it under their own autonomy, as opposed to, oh, who's going to give me the right assignment? Who's going to mentor me? Who's
Yes.
going to be in charge of this client relationship? How is the money going to be distributed in the profit pool at the end of the year? We get rid of all of that stuff.
And then that sense of autonomy allows us to, oddly enough, be more responsible as human beings and business owners, right? Because when there's no one putting their thumb down on you and saying you're not good enough or you got to do it my way, ironically, people flourish and take control and say, I'm responsible for my part and I'm going to do the best I can because others trust me. And I think that's a resounding lesson for us all to learn in business and in life, because it applies to the humanity of us. So this next part of this conversation, and I know we've got to keep it brief on this, but every great person that inspires us as a leader, like Juan, has issues because we're all doing the best we can and we've got a full plate. So, Juan, what's one thing we can work on here and the listeners can learn from, that's a challenge on your plate, and that we can talk through and brainstorm through, and I can coach you on, because everyone's got some challenge of the day, whether that's big or small in their world and everybody else's world. No judgment, no challenge is too big or too small.
Well, the current challenge on my plate is, very topical, very personal. It is transitioning as a mid to late 50s empty nester. And when you're, a professional in a high demanding profession and you've got young kids, you're constantly working on that balance of being there as a parent while fulfilling your duties. Now I'm at an age in which my kids are adults. They're up and out into the world, at least in college. I don't know if that's the real world, but it's college. And I'm faced now with a transition in life. And transitions can be difficult. And I'm struggling because, you know, relationship issues change when your kids move out. Professional issues change when you've got, different things happening. So I think it's kind of, this particular moment in my time is, I think, in some ways, one that's kind of like a bit neglected. People will talk more about the work-life balance, taking care of kids when you've got kids in the home. But what happens to you when that sort of big um, part of your life, separates? It's kind of like, for me, I'm going through almost a process of grief, if you will, and
Yes.
trying to reanalyze and reassess who I want to be, socially and emotionally at this moment in time. And I think one of the dangers that I find myself falling into is diving back into work, right? And using work as a substitute for finding other ways to fill this gap that I've got
Yes.
right now. And I
Well,
think, as I'm living it, as I'm experiencing it, as I'm talking to you right now, I think it's a neglected and underexplored transition that we face when we're at this age.
oh, so well said. First of all, thank you for your vulnerability and your honesty. And thank you for picking a personal issue. A lot of times people come as my guests and think there has to be a professional business, but whatever that means to them, it's fine. But and I see Rhonda was shaking her head, yes, for all of those listening that
Yeah,
can't see, because it's
I've recently
everyone's
gone
issue.
through the same thing.
Thank you for noting that. It's everyone's issue, and you've come to the right place with that question, Juan. It almost feels like it's synchronicity, because a lot of people call me a transition coach because those shifts, those opportunities to go from one place of being to another are the most challenging part for people. And that's actually what we see at the background why law firms aren't thriving as much, because they refuse to let go of what was and move into the space of the unknown in between the past and the future, and just sit in the present and say, I'm Juan and I'm in a transition phase, and this makes me very uncomfortable because I'm used to that and I miss that. And part of our identity is wrapped up in that role of having children at home and having life be a certain way to support us in our roles. And when those shift, it takes away from our identity. And I think, to your point, what you need to do is exactly what you're doing, the self-awareness to not lapse into keeping yourself so busy that you lose sight of sitting in the uncomfort, the discomfort of it, so that you can see next steps. That's actually what I always say is the definition of the word discernment. Discernment is sitting still long enough to make a judgment of what's going on with you that works for you, to know what the next steps should be in the process, in your journey as you reinvent, right? And when we don't sit still long enough to discern the next steps in our growth, we miss the boat and we turn to our vices, like working too much, drinking too much, whatever it is that distracts us from this uncomfortable place of just sitting still and going, this is uncomfortable, but hey, anytime you're pivoting from transitioning from point A to point B, there has to be that growth element because it's unknown, right? And the unknown is challenging. But I look at all of what you're saying as reinvention. And I like that word for you, because look at from your story how many times you've reinvented yourself. And Rhonda used that as well. You've reinvented yourself many times. I have too. And I'm always looking to speak to other lawyers that are reinventing, because those are the people that see the bigger picture, innovation, creativity. They're willing to be uncomfortable and go out on a limb. They teach others, lawyers and humans, how to do it. And so I would say journal on it, talk about it, maybe put a blog on the website about this topic, because it will draw others in and it will provide that healing space for you. And then others can watch how you're going about and doing this and pick their own path through it, because this is everyone's world. Whether your children leave, maybe you're single and going, this doesn't apply, but we have pets, right? Pets die, we get divorced. I mean, there's so many transition points in our lives, and if we're always quote unquote practicing law, we miss the humanity of our evolution, truly. And I think that's
Well, so one thing that I've sort of discovered, in sitting with things, is that if you're a lawyer like me, you got to be kind of conscious of a certain trap, right? And the trap is there are aspects of our profession that can be very, very fulfilling, right? You close a transaction successfully and you sort of get this rush. Yeah, I did it. I was the lawyer who closed that deal or whatever, right? And when you use that as a substitute for the kind of satisfaction that you need to get out of life, that's where there's a trap, I think, right? When the profession takes over because you don't want to do the uncomfortable work of trying to figure out what you need from life as opposed to what you need from work. And it's a really delicate line to be able to identify and to find the right balance in. And again, if you go back to my origin story, I got so much satisfaction of helping those immigrants get their status legalized. It pushed me into law school, but it's also the kind of thing that could push me over the edge in trying to find more satisfaction in work than I do from life, right? Work is a component of life. It's a segment of life. It is not a substitute for all of those other things that you need to do, which is, again, finding the transition to parenting adults, relationship, and other types of satisfaction of things that are important to have good balance.
so well said. And I'm going to leave it on that note, because I just want that to resonate with you as the listener. Work is a component of life. Work cannot be our entire life. And it may sound cliche, but cliches are often said because they're true. And so take that away for what it's worth. What do you need from your life versus from your work? Brilliant, brilliant conversation. I could probably talk to Juan and Rhonda for another hour, but I know the listener, you've got to go. And Juan and Rhonda are certainly busy people running a law firm. Let's not forget, which is just a component of their life, not their whole life. But we got clients to serve and we've got people to help. So, if people want to learn more about Ramon and you both, where should we send them to? And we'll put them in the show notes. Please let us know which URL would you like us to go to?
Well, I'd submit, and Rhonda, of course, you can pipe in. If you're a lawyer who is interested in joining Ramon, reach out to Rhonda. She'll give you contact information. If also you're a lawyer who kind of wants to just explore what's going on in your career, in your life, I'm busy, but you can reach out to me. My email is juan.zuniga@rimonlaw.com. You can also learn more about our firm generally at the website, rimonlaw.com. Rhonda, you want to add anything about that?
And if you're interested in exploring career opportunities, recruiting at ramonlaw.com.
Beautiful. We've got all those URLs captured. We'll put them in the show notes. Listeners, scroll down and see the show notes. Thank you both for a fantastic conversation. It truly made my whole week. We're recording this, like I said, on World Kindness Day. It's a Monday. And you've energized me, given me hope for the legal profession. And look, if you're listening to this and going, I can't do that, you can do it in your own way. It doesn't have to look like the way Juan and Rhonda and the rest of the firm are doing it. But my hope sincerely is that it gave you some ideas. And if it just gave you one thing you can do differently in your practice, maybe sitting in the discomfort of whatever you're grappling with, then you're growing, and that's a good place, and you've gotten true value for what you spent the time on. And so thank you all for your time and your energy and your effort to making the world a better place, Juan and Rhonda and the rest of your team. I look forward to perhaps doing a follow-up, honestly, because there's so much more we could have talked about. If you guys can squeeze me in, we'll do a part 2 at a later
Yeah, for sure.
That would be fantastic. And I sincerely thank you guys for being part of my program, my process. And to the rest of you out there, go out and do the best you can, make it a beautiful life. And remember, work is just one component of your life. And until next time, Katie G out. Thanks for joining me on my podcast.